The evening sun cast long shadows across the city hall steps as the newly appointed police captain adjusted his tie, still processing the weight of the moment. Just an hour ago, he had accepted the promotion that would make him one of the youngest precinct captains in the department's history. His wife squeezed his hand gently, her eyes shining with pride as they walked toward their car. "I still can't believe it," she said, her voice warm with excitement. 20 years on the force, and now look at you." She straightened his jacket collar, a habit she'd developed over their 15 years of marriage. "You know what this means, right?" he replied, unlocking their silver sedan. "We can finally start making those changes we've been talking about. Real community engagement, better training programs." His voice trailed off as he opened the passenger door for her, his mind already racing with plans. The couple had met during a community service program where he was volunteering while still a rookie officer. She was there coordinating youth outreach activities, and they connected over their shared vision of bridging gaps between law enforcement and local communities. Now, after years of working their way up in their respective fields, they were finally in a position to make meaningful change. As they drove through the familiar streets of their city, the captain's wife pulled out her tablet, already making notes. "We should start with the mentorship program you mentioned," she suggested, her background in community development shining through. Connecting officers with local youth could make such a difference. He nodded, navigating through the quiet suburban streets they called home. The evening was peaceful, with families visible through lit windows sharing dinner, kids playing in front yards, and dog walkers enjoying the last light of day. This was the community they loved, the one they'd chosen to build their life in, despite occasional raised eyebrows and whispered comments. "You know it would be perfect," he said, turning onto Maple Avenue. "Remember that coffee shop program they started in the 12th Precinct, where officers would have regular meet and greets with residents? We could expand on that, make it more structured but keep it casual enough that people feel comfortable having real conversations." His wife's eyes lit up. "And we could partner with the youth center. Get the teens involved in planning the events. Show them that officers are part of the community too." She paused, checking a message on her phone. "Oh, and don't forget, we're supposed to meet with the community board next week. Perfect timing to introduce some of these ideas." The captain smiled, remembering his early days on patrol. How different things might have been for some of his colleagues if programs like these had existed 20 years ago. He'd seen too many good officers become jaded, losing touch with the very people they'd sworn to protect and serve. The streetlights were just beginning to flicker on as they discussed their plans. The excitement of the day had them both energized despite the late hour. They were so engrossed in their conversation about future initiatives that they almost missed the flash of red and blue lights suddenly reflecting in their rearview mirror. "That's odd," he muttered, checking his speed out of habit. He hadn't been speeding, and their car registration was up to date. He signaled and pulled over to the curb, following the procedures he taught countless rookies over the years. His wife fell silent, her tablet forgotten in her lap as they both watched the patrol car door open in the side mirror. The captain reached for his wallet, knowing his ID and badge were inside, but something made him pause. Years of experience had taught him to read situations, and something about this one felt different. Neither of them spoke as footsteps approached their car, but they shared a look that carried years of shared understanding. Whatever was about to happen, they would handle it together, just as they had handled every other challenge that had come their way. The tap on the window was much harder than necessary, and as the captain reached to lower it, his wife quietly started recording on her phone, a habit they'd learned was sometimes necessary, even in their own neighborhood. Neither of them could have guessed that this routine traffic stop was about to become a turning point not just in their lives, but in the entire department's history. The beam from a flashlight swept through their car, so bright it made the captain's wife squint. She kept her phone discreetly recording, while maintaining perfect stillness, years of similar experiences having taught them both the importance of staying calm. "License and registration," the first officer barked, not even bothering with the customary good evening. His partner stood slightly behind him, hand resting unnecessarily on his holster. The captain noticed their body cameras weren't activated, a direct violation of department policy. "Of course, officer," the captain replied evenly, keeping his hands visible on the steering wheel. "May I ask why we've been stopped?" The first officer's flashlight beam remained fixed on their faces. "You were swerving back there," Been drinking tonight?" The captain and his wife shared a quick glance. They both knew they hadn't swerved at all. "No, sir," he responded respectfully, though he outranked both officers. "We're just heading home from a work event." "Sure you are," the second officer scoffed, stepping closer to the window. "This is a nice car for this neighborhood. Where'd you get it?" The captain's wife took a slow, steady breath. As a community organizer, she'd heard countless stories like this from local residents. Now it was happening to them, less than an hour after her husband's promotion ceremony. "It's our car," she said calmly, keeping her voice level. "We've lived in this neighborhood for 12 years. "Nobody asked you to speak," the first officer snapped, his flashlight beam swinging aggressively toward her face. "Sir, step out of the vehicle." The captain kept his hands visible. "Officer, I don't believe I'm legally required to exit the vehicle without probable cause. If you could please explain the reason for this stop." "Listen here," the first officer cut him off, his tone growing more hostile. "When an officer tells you to do something, you do it. Now get out of the car, or we'll have a problem." The captain could feel his wife's tension beside him. He'd trained hundreds of officers over his career, taught them about de-escalation, about treating every citizen with respect. These officers were displaying exactly the kind of behavior he'd worked so hard to eliminate. "Very well," he said quietly. "I'm going to reach for my wallet first. It contains my identification." He moved his hand slowly, deliberately, toward his back pocket. "Hey, keep those hands where we can see them," the second officer shouted, now fully drawing his weapon. The metallic sound of the gun clearing its holster seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet suburban street. The captain froze, his heart pounding not for himself, but for his wife beside him. He could hear her breathing quicken, though she remained outwardly calm. Through the rearview mirror, he noticed several curtains twitching in nearby houses. Witnesses. Good. "My hands are visible, officer," he said, his voice remaining steady. "I'm simply complying with your request for identification. I'm going to reach for my wallet very slowly." "Last warning," the first officer growled, his own hand moving to his weapon. "Exit the vehicle now, or we'll remove you ourselves." The captain weighed his options. As a black man, he'd been in similar situations before becoming an officer. As a police captain, he knew exactly how many protocols these officers were violating. Every instinct from his 20 years of service told him the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. A third patrol car pulled up behind them, its lights spinning silently. The captain's wife kept her phone recording, her hands trembling slightly but the lens steady. They could hear the crackle of radio traffic as more units responded to what had apparently been called in as a suspicious vehicle. Neighbors were emerging from their homes now, standing on porches, some holding up their own phones. The captain recognized several faces: the retired teacher from across the street, the young couple who'd just moved in next door, the teenager who mowed their lawn every weekend. "Officers," the captain tried one more time, his voice carrying the authority of his 2 decades of service. "I want to comply with your requests, but I need you to understand that your current actions are not in line with department procedures." The first officer's face contorted with anger. "Oh no, so now you're telling us how to do our job. That's it, both of you, out of the car now. Hands where we can see them." The captain caught his wife's eye one last time. In that look past years of shared experiences, shared pain, and shared determination to make things better. Whatever happened next would be documented, witnessed, and dealt with properly. He just had to make sure everyone stayed safe until he could reveal his identity. As he reached again for his wallet, moving with exaggerated slowness, he silently thanked his wife for having the foresight to record everything. Sometimes the best way to create change was to let people see exactly what needed changing. He just hadn't expected his first test as captain to come quite so soon. Time seemed to slow down as the captain's hand moved toward his back pocket. The night air was thick with tension, broken only by the subtle whir of phone cameras and the distant sound of more approaching sirens. His wallet felt heavy in his pocket. Inside it, the badge and ID that would change everything about this encounter. "I'm reaching for my identification," he announced clearly, his voice carrying to the growing crowd of neighbors. Several more patrol cars had arrived, their red and blue lights painting the street in shifting colors. Some of the newer officers were hanging back, sensing something wasn't right about this stop. His wife's phone kept recording as he slowly pulled out his wallet. The leather was worn smooth from years of use, its surface reflecting the harsh beam of flashlights. The first officer's finger was still on his weapon's trigger guard, a clear violation of basic training protocols. "Drop it," the second officer shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "Put it down right now." "Officers," the captain's wife spoke up, her voice strong and clear. "Everything being done here is being recorded. There are at least 12 witnesses on this street right now. Please think carefully about your next actions." A sergeant had arrived on scene, pushing through the small crowd of officers that had gathered. He stopped short when he recognized the car, his eyes widening in realization. But before he could speak, the first officer made his final mistake. "Nobody cares about your recordings," he sneered, reaching for the car door handle. "You're both going to learn about respecting police authority tonight." The captain held his wallet up, letting it fall open to reveal the gold badge within. The shield caught the light from the cruisers, its surface gleaming. "Actually, officer," he said quietly, "I believe we're all going to learn something about proper police procedure tonight." The effect was immediate. The second officer's weapon dipped toward the ground as he stumbled back a step. The first officer's face went through a rapid series of expressions: anger, confusion, disbelief, and finally, dawning horror. Is that?" he stammered, his earlier bravado evaporating. "This is my badge and department ID," the captain continued, his voice now carrying the full weight of his authority. "I'm the new captain of this precinct. As of about 2 hours ago, I'm your commanding officer." The sergeant who had recognized the situation pushed forward. "Everyone, weapons down. Those are my orders, right now." His voice cracked like a whip through the night air, and weapons disappeared into holsters with remarkable speed. The captain's wife was still recording, capturing everything: the shocked faces of the officers, the murmurs running through the crowd of neighbors, the way the first two officers seemed to physically shrink as the reality of their situation sank in. "Sergeant," the captain called out, still not moving from his seated position. "Would you please ensure that all officers on scene activate their body cameras immediately? I want everything from this point forward documented officially." "Yes, sir." The sergeant began moving through the group of officers, checking cameras and taking names. The professionalism in his voice was a stark contrast to the earlier hostile tones. The captain finally stepped out of his car, his movements unhurried and deliberate. He stood to his full height, brushing off his suit jacket, the same suit he'd worn to his promotion ceremony just hours before. His wife exited from the passenger side, her phone still recording. "Officers," he addressed the original two who had stopped him. "I need your badge numbers and names." His tone wasn't angry or vengeful. If anything, it carried a note of sadness. "We're going to have a long discussion about what happened here tonight, but first, I want every officer present to look around." He gestured to the gathered neighbors, the phones recording, the children watching from windows. "This is our community. These are the people we swore to protect and serve. Every person watching right now has just witnessed exactly why we need major changes in this department." One of the younger officers in the crowd spoke up, his voice uncertain. "Sir, the promotion ceremony today. The speech you gave about community relations and departmental reform." "Yes," the captain nodded. "I meant every word of it. And now, thanks to these officers here, we have a perfect example of exactly what needs to change." He turned back to the two officers who had stopped him, who were now standing at rigid attention, their faces pale. "You didn't know who I was when you stopped us," he continued. "You didn't know my rank, my position, my years of service. You saw exactly what you wanted to see, and you acted on assumptions that have no place in modern police work." His wife stepped forward, finally lowering her phone. "I've spent years working with community members who've experienced exactly this type of treatment," she added. "The only difference tonight is that it happened to someone with the power to do something about it." The captain looked at each officer present, making eye contact, letting the weight of the moment sink in. "Starting tomorrow, things will be different in this department. What happened here tonight? This ends now. Not just for captains, not just for people with phones recording, but for everyone. Every single traffic stop, every interaction. Every citizen deserves the respect that you failed to show tonight." He turned to the sergeant. "I want every officer present in my office first thing tomorrow morning. We're going to review the footage, all of it. The dash cams, the body cams, the phone recordings. This is going to become a teaching moment for the entire department. The night air, which had been so thick with tension earlier, now felt charged with something different: possibility, change, hope. The neighbors who had gathered to witness what they thought would be another tragic incident were instead watching the first moments of what would become a transformation in the community's police force. The captain's wife squeezed his hand gently, a gesture hidden from the officers but seen by the watching neighbors. In that simple touch was years of shared dreams about making their community better, about turning difficult moments into opportunities for change. Neither of them had expected their chance to come quite like this, but they were ready for it. His wife stepped forward, finally lowering her phone. "I've spent years working with community members who've experienced exactly this type of treatment," she added. "The only difference tonight is that it happened to someone with the power to do something about it." The captain looked at each officer present, making eye contact, letting the weight of the moment sink in. "Starting tomorrow, things will be different in this department. What happened here tonight? This ends now. Not just for captains, not just for people with phones recording, but for everyone. Every single traffic stop, every interaction, every citizen deserves the respect that you failed to show tonight." He turned to the sergeant. "I want every officer present in my office first thing tomorrow morning. We're going to review the footage, all of it. The dash cams, the body cams, the phone recordings. This is going to become a teaching moment for the entire department." The night air, which had been so thick with tension earlier, now felt charged with something different: possibility, change, hope. The neighbors who had gathered to witness what they thought would be another tragic incident were instead watching the first moments of what would become a transformation in the community's police force. The captain's wife squeezed his hand gently, a gesture hidden from the officers but seen by the watching neighbors. In that simple touch was years of shared dreams about making their community better, about turning difficult moments into opportunities for change. Neither of them had expected their chance to come quite like this, but they were ready for it. The next hour unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony, though none of it had been planned. The captain stood in the middle of the street, now brightly lit by patrol car lights, as he turned a potential disaster into a teaching moment. His wife had stopped recording but hadn't put her phone away. Years of experience had taught them both that documentation didn't end until everyone was safely home. "Sergeant," the captain called out, his voice carrying naturally across the now quiet street. "I want you to walk me through standard procedure for a traffic stop. Right here, right now. Let's make this educational for everyone present." The sergeant stepped forward, his posture straight but not stiff. He'd been on the force for 15 years and had a solid reputation for training rookies. "Yes, sir. Standard procedure begins with clearly radioing in the stop location and reason. Officers should activate body cameras before leaving their vehicle." As the sergeant continued his explanation, the two officers who had made the stop stood silently, their earlier arrogance replaced by a mix of shame and fear. The captain held up his hand, pausing the sergeant's recitation. "Officers," he addressed them directly, "how many of these standard procedures did you follow tonight?" His tone wasn't mocking or angry. If anything, it carried a note of genuine curiosity. The first officer cleared his throat. "Sir, he paused, then straightened his shoulders. "None of them, sir. We followed none of the procedures." A murmur ran through the gathered crowd of neighbors. They were still watching, still recording, but the atmosphere had shifted from tense anticipation to something more like witnessing history in the making. The captain nodded. "Thank you for that honest answer. Now I want internal affairs here within the hour. Not tomorrow, not next week, tonight. Every officer present will give a statement while events are fresh in their minds." He turned to address all the officers present. "I want you all to understand something. What happens next isn't about punishment. It's about change. Real, lasting change that starts right here, right now, on this street." His wife stepped forward, her community organizer instincts kicking in. "Some of our neighbors are still watching," she said quietly. "This could be an opportunity to show them what positive police work actually looks like." The captain considered this, then nodded. "Sergeant, set up a perimeter. Not to keep people out, but to create a space where we can talk. I want any neighbor who's interested to see exactly how professional police work should be conducted." The sergeant began directing officers to move their vehicles, creating an impromptu community space right there on the street. The patrol car lights were dimmed but left on, providing illumination without the aggressive flashing. Some officers instinctively reached for the yellow caution tape, but the captain shook his head. "No tape," he said firmly. "We're not cordoning off our community. We're inviting them in." Within minutes, the scene had transformed. The Internal Affairs investigators arrived, setting up a mobile command center in one of the larger police vehicles. The two officers who had conducted the stop were separated and seated in different areas, each with an IA investigator taking their statements. The captain's wife had started talking with some of the neighbors, her years of community work evident in how easily she created a bridge between the watching residents and the police presence. Children who had been peeking through windows were now sitting on their front porches, watching with curious eyes as real police work unfolded before them. "Each of you," the captain addressed the gathered officers, "will have a chance to learn from this. Some of you might be thinking this is an overreaction to a simple traffic stop. But I want you to imagine, really imagine, how this could have ended if I hadn't been a police captain." He gestured to the neighbors gathered around. "These are the people who see everything we do. Their children grow up watching us, forming their opinions about law enforcement based on our actions. Tonight, they're going to see us hold ourselves accountable." The Internal Affairs lieutenant approached, notepad in hand. "Sir, we've got the preliminary statements. There's enough here to justify immediate suspension pending full investigation." The captain held up his hand. "Before we make any decisions, I want to try something different." He turned to the two officers who had stopped him. "You both have choices to make. The easy choice is to accept whatever punishment comes down. The harder choice is to be part of the solution." He walked over to where they sat, speaking quietly but still loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I'm offering you a chance to help change the department from the inside, to turn your mistake into something that helps other officers learn. But it won't be easy. You'll have to confront your own biases, work directly with the communities you've mistreated, and help develop new training programs." The first officer looked up, his face showing a mix of emotions. "Sir, why would you give us that chance? After how we treated you?" "Because," the captain replied, "change doesn't happen by removing people from the equation. It happens by helping people transform themselves." He turned to address all the officers present. "That goes for everyone here. Starting tomorrow, we're not just changing policies, we're changing hearts and minds." As the night deepened, the scene slowly transformed into something unprecedented in the department's history. A genuine dialogue between police and community members, all sparked by what could have been just another tragic incident. The captain's wife kept taking notes, already seeing ways to build on this moment, to turn it into lasting change. The neighbors who had come out expecting to witness another sad statistic were instead watching the first steps of a revolution in community policing, one that would ripple out far beyond their quiet suburban street. And at the center of it all stood the new captain, turning a moment of confrontation into an opportunity for transformation. The morning sun streamed through the precinct windows as the captain sat at his desk, surrounded by stacks of files and open laptops. It had been 3 days since the incident, and what started as an investigation into one traffic stop had opened up a much larger conversation. His wife sat across from him, her community organization experience proving invaluable as they reviewed years of traffic stop data. She'd taken a few days off from her own work to help. This was too important to handle alone. "Look at this pattern," she said, pointing to a spreadsheet. "The same areas, the same times of night, the same types of stops. It's all here in the data." The captain nodded, rubbing his tired eyes. They'd been going through records since dawn. "And these aren't just numbers," he replied. "Each one of these represents someone's son, daughter, parent, friend." A knock at the door interrupted them. The Internal Affairs lieutenant entered, carrying even more files. "Sir, you need to see this," she said, laying out a series of photographs. "We've been reviewing body camera footage from the past 6 months. The behavior you experienced, it wasn't an isolated incident." The photos showed similar scenes playing out across the city, drivers being ordered out of cars without cause, officers with hands on weapons during routine stops, scared faces illuminated by harsh flashlight beams. "The good news," the lieutenant continued, "is that not everyone's involved. We've identified specific patterns, specific officers, specific training gaps. This is fixable." The captain's wife leaned forward, her organizer's mind already working. "We need to bring in the community. They've been documenting these incidents for years. Their experiences, their stories, they're as important as any official report." Just then, one of the two officers from the traffic stop appeared at the door. He looked different now, humbler, more thoughtful. "Sir," the community center called. "They want to know if we're still coming to their meeting tonight." The captain looked up, studying the young officer's face. Since that night, both officers had surprised everyone with their willingness to engage in the reform process. "Yes, we'll be there. Have you prepared your statement?" The officer nodded, clutching a notebook. "I've been writing and rewriting it all week. Never thought I'd be standing in front of the same community members I used to." He paused, searching for words. "Used to profile?" The captain's wife suggested gently. "It's okay to say it. Naming the problem is the first step to fixing it." The room fell quiet as a group of senior officers filed in for the morning briefing. They took their seats, some looking uncomfortable, others determined. The captain had made these meetings mandatory. Everyone needed to be part of the change. "Let's start with the numbers," he began, standing to address the room. "In the past year alone, our precinct conducted over 5,000 traffic stops. Want to guess how many of those had proper documentation? How many followed standard procedure?" He clicked through slides showing stark statistics, clear patterns of bias, and areas where training had failed. Some officers shifted in their seats, others took detailed notes. This wasn't the kind of meeting they were used to. "But here's the thing," he continued, switching to a new slide. "We also found examples of excellent police work. Officers who consistently follow procedure, who treat every citizen with respect, who make our communities safer through their professionalism." His wife stepped up, adding her perspective. "The community isn't asking for special treatment," she explained. "They're asking for consistent, professional treatment. The kind of treatment that some of your fellow officers already provide every day." The Internal Affairs lieutenant joined in, pointing to specific cases. "Look at these examples. Same situation, different approaches, completely different outcomes. It's not about being soft on crime. It's about being smart about policing." As the meeting continued, the captain noticed something changing in the room. Officers who had initially seemed resistant were now engaged, asking questions, offering suggestions. The two officers from his traffic stop shared their perspectives, turning their mistake into a learning opportunity for others. "We've got support from the top," the captain explained, showing emails from police leadership. "They've approved our request for additional training resources, community oversight panels, and a complete review of our procedures." His wife added her own news. "And the community leaders are on board. They see this as a chance for real partnership, not just surface-level changes." The room buzzed with discussion as officers broke into groups, reviewing cases, suggesting improvements, identifying patterns that needed attention. This wasn't just about fixing past mistakes. It was about preventing future ones. "One more thing," the captain said as the meeting wound down. "Starting next week, we're implementing ride-alongs with community leaders. Every officer will spend time seeing the neighborhood through their eyes, and they'll spend time seeing it through ours." As the officers filed out, the Internal Affairs lieutenant stayed behind. "Sir, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've never seen anything like this, officers actually wanting to be part of the solution." The captain's wife smiled, gathering her notes. "Sometimes people just need to see that change is possible. That night, on that street, everyone saw it. Now we just have to keep that momentum going." Looking out his office window at the community he'd sworn to protect and serve, the captain felt a mix of hope and determination. The investigation had revealed deep problems, but it had also shown the way forward. Now came the hard part: turning all these plans and promises into real, lasting change. The community center buzzed with activity as officers and residents gathered for another joint training session. 2 months had passed since that fateful traffic stop, and the changes in the department were starting to take root. The captain stood at the back of the room, watching as one of the officers who had stopped him that night led a discussion about bias awareness. "I used to think I was just doing my job," the officer was saying, his voice carrying genuine emotion. "But now I understand that my actions were affecting entire families, entire neighborhoods. Every time I pulled someone over without cause, I wasn't just breaking procedure, I was breaking trust. The room was packed with a mix of faces, veteran officers, community leaders, young recruits, and local residents. They sat together at round tables, sharing stories and perspectives that would have seemed impossible just months ago. The captain's wife worked her way through the room, clipboard in hand, gathering feedback and suggestions. She'd become an essential bridge between the police department and the community, helping both sides understand each other better. Remember last week's scenario training? One elderly resident was saying to a young officer, "When you took the time to explain why you needed to see my ID instead of just demanding it, that's exactly how it should be done." At another table, a teenager was describing his recent interaction with patrol officers. They stopped by our basketball game, but instead of telling us to leave like they used to, they asked if they could join in. It felt different. Good different. The two officers from the traffic stop incident had become unexpected champions of change. Instead of accepting suspension or transfer, they'd chosen the harder path, facing their mistakes and working to help others learn from them. The hardest part, the second officer was explaining to a group of recruits, was admitting to ourselves that we had these biases. But once you start seeing them, you can't unsee them. And that's when real change begins. The captain moved to the front of the room as the current session wrapped up. Next week, he announced, we're starting our new community patrol program. Each officer will be paired with a local resident for their walking beat. This isn't just about oversight, it's about understanding the neighborhoods we serve. His wife added, and don't forget about the youth mentorship program. We've already got 20 officers signed up to work with local students. Remember, this isn't just about changing policies, it's about changing relationships. The changes weren't always easy. Some officers had resisted, clinging to old ways of thinking. A few had even transferred out rather than adapt. But for every officer who left, 2 more stepped up, eager to be part of the transformation. You know what's different now? A veteran officer commented during the break, "We're not just enforcing the law, we're part of the community. Yesterday, I helped a kid with his math homework during my lunch break. Never would have happened before." The training sessions had evolved too. What started as basic bias awareness had grown into something more comprehensive. Officers learned about local history, cultural traditions, and the impact of past police practices on different neighborhoods. "Show me your stance," a community leader was saying to a group of officers. "No, not your arrest stance, your listening stance. How do you show someone you're really hearing them?" The captain watched as officers practiced different approaches to common situations. Role-playing exercises had become a regular part of training, with community members providing feedback and suggestions. Remember, his wife told a group of newer officers, every interaction is a chance to build trust. Whether it's a traffic stop or a casual conversation, you're either strengthening or weakening the relationship between police and community. The 2 officers from the traffic stop had developed a powerful presentation about their experience, which they now shared with other departments across the city. Their story of transformation had become a symbol of what was possible when people were willing to change. "We could have lost our jobs that night," one of them reflected during a break. "Instead, we got a chance to be part of something bigger than ourselves, something that actually makes a difference." The impact was showing in the numbers too. Complaints against officers had dropped significantly. Community tip lines were busier than ever, with residents more willing to work with police they now trusted. Crime rates were starting to decline in areas where the new community policing programs were strongest. "It's not perfect yet," the captain told a group of visiting officials. "We still have work to do, but we're proving that change is possible. Real, lasting change that benefits everyone." As the session wound down, officers and residents lingered, continuing conversations that would have seemed impossible months ago. The captain overheard snippets of discussion about upcoming community events, local issues that needed attention, and ideas for improving police-community relations. His wife joined him, smiling as she watched a rookie officer getting advice from a grandmother about how to approach young people with respect. "You know what's different now?" she asked quietly. "Hope. People actually believe things can be better." Looking around the room at the mixed group of officers and residents working together, sharing stories and building trust, the captain nodded. "This is what real police work should look like," he said. "Not us versus them, but all of us working together to make our communities safer and stronger. As people began to leave, making plans for next week's session, the energy in the room remained positive and purposeful. What had started as a crisis on a dark street had grown into something transformative, a model for how police and communities could work together to create real, lasting change. 1 year had passed since that pivotal night. The captain stood at the podium in the police academy's main hall, looking out at the fresh faces of new recruits mixed with veteran officers and community members. The annual department review meeting had become something different, a celebration of progress and a reminder of how far they'd come. A year ago, he began, his voice carrying across the packed room. A traffic stop changed everything. Not because of what went wrong, but because of what came after. Today, I want to share what we've learned. His wife sat in the front row, next to the 2 officers from that night. They were different men now, respected trainers who'd helped reshape the department's approach to community policing. Their story had become a powerful teaching tool used in police academies across the country. The numbers tell part of the story, the captain continued, clicking through slides. Citizen complaints down by 60%. Community tip line calls up by 40%. Crime rates dropping in areas where we've implemented community policing programs. But numbers don't tell the whole story. He gestured to a teenager sitting in the audience. Tell them about your basketball league, he encouraged. The young man stood up, slightly nervous but proud. Last year, I was scared of police officers. Now, I run a youth basketball program with them. We've got kids from every neighborhood playing together, and officers coach our teams. My little brother doesn't grow up afraid anymore. An elderly woman rose next, her voice strong despite her years. I've lived in this city for 50 years. Never thought I'd see the day when I'd have officers' phone numbers in my contacts, when I could call them not just for emergencies, but when our community needs help with anything. The captain's wife stepped up to share the community perspective. Change isn't just about new policies, it's about new relationships. Today, our officers don't just patrol neighborhoods, they're part of them. They know the families, the struggles, the dreams of the people they serve. One of the officers from that night stood to speak. His voice had lost the arrogance of a year ago, replaced by something more thoughtful. I used to think being tough made me a good officer. Now I know that being understanding, being human, that's what makes a real difference. The presentation continued with more stories. A shop owner talked about how officers helped organize a neighborhood watch program that actually worked. A young mother described how police support had helped her son's after-school program thrive. Each story built on the last, painting a picture of real change. But we're not done, the captain emphasized. This is just the beginning. Every day, we learn something new. Every interaction is a chance to build more trust, to serve better, to be better. His wife shared updates on new initiatives. The department's training program had become a model for others, with officers from across the country coming to learn their methods. Community members were now regular participants in officer training, sharing their perspectives and experiences. The 2 officers who had stopped the captain that night now ran the department's bias awareness program. Their honest sharing of their own journey from that night to now had powerful impact on other officers. Remember that street? One of them asked the audience. Where it all started? Last week I was there again. But this time, I was helping kids with their homework at the community center we helped build. That's what real police work looks like. The captain shared videos of recent community events, police and residents working together on neighborhood projects, youth programs flourishing, new officers being welcomed into the communities they served. The difference from a year ago was striking. This isn't just our story anymore, he said, wrapping up. It's becoming the story of departments across the country. Every week, we get calls from other cities wanting to know how we did it. And we tell them the truth. It starts with admitting when we're wrong and being brave enough to change. His wife joined in at the podium for the final announcements. The department's community oversight board had become a real partnership, with residents and officers working together to solve problems. The mentorship program had expanded to include every new officer. A year ago, she reminded everyone, we stood on a dark street and saw 2 paths forward. We could have let anger and fear win. Instead, we chose hope. We chose change, and look what that choice created. The captain looked out at the faces in the room, officers and residents, young and old, All part of this transformation. Every day, somewhere in our city, an officer makes a traffic stop. But now, these stops tell a different story. They tell the story of what's possible when we remember that behind every badge, behind every encounter, are human beings capable of growth, understanding, and change. As the meeting ended, people lingered, sharing stories and making plans. The energy in the room was electric, not with tension like that night a year ago, but with possibility. What had started as one incident had grown into a movement, a real change in how police and communities could work together. The captain and his wife walked home that evening, past the spot where everything had changed. Children played freely in the streets now, waving at passing patrol cars. Officers walked their beats in pairs, one police, one community member, talking and laughing as they worked. "You know what's different now?" his wife asked, echoing a question from a year ago. "Everything. And nothing. Because this is how it always should have been." The captain nodded, watching a young officer stop to help a child retrieve a ball from a bush. No tension, no fear, just human beings helping each other. One traffic stop, he mused. One moment that could have gone so wrong. Instead, it went right in ways we never imagined. As they walked home in the gathering dusk, their neighborhood felt different than it had a year ago. Not because the streets or houses had changed, but because the people in them had changed. Officers and residents, once separated by fear and mistrust, now worked together to build something better. It wasn't perfect. Change never is. But it was real, lasting, and growing stronger every day.